Hello people! I will over the course of the next few weeks be introducing the Araxian order. We will do so by diving into the history of the planet Braxar the Araxian order originated from. On ancient Braxar coexisted three species advanced enough to fit the Terran Governor's 5 criteria of sentience for hundreds of millennia. This will be the first of a 2-video series describing one of the species, the Kurr. More videos on the Vohlg and The Nevermehn will follow. Then lastly, we go through their joint history until the birth of the Araxian order. Here comes a short description of Kurr characteristics followed by the 3 Kurr genders, the workers, the genetic processing gender, and the hatchers. Then a quick mention of the evolution of the Kurr take on a central government. The Kurr as a species. The Kurr were the first sentient life to evolve on Braxar. They were an insectoid species with 3 genders. The Kurr were naturally prone to cooperation and peaceful coexistence. They assigned only function, not authority, to individual members and had no social hierarchy. As a logical extension, early Kurr settlements had no central governance. If an area became overpopulated, Kurr simply migrated or limited their reproduction in accordance. With no skirmishes or overpopulation for much of Kurr existence, there was never a want for central governance neither. The Kurr as individuals. Individually, each Kurr had cognitive abilities somewhat more advanced than an Earth chimpanzee. Rather than individual intelligence, the Kurr evolved along the route of other abilities that, much like individual intelligence, allowed the Kurr to develop technology and form complex societies. The Kurr had limited genetic memories, allowing Kurr to pass on skills and beneficial actions from one generation to the next and build a knowledge bank over time. Much like the invention of writing in other cultures, the Kurr were also born with scent, visual, chemical, vocal, and taste-based language and could communicate from the moment they hatched. They also learned vocal communication mere days after being born through a combination of imitation, natural affinity, and genetic memory. The spoken language of the Kurr was the only language that varied regionally and between groups. The rest remained identical throughout Kurr existence. One of the last spoken Kurr dialects later became the language of the Araxian order. The word Araxian even meant great calamity, and was how some Kurr colonies referred to the Vohlg who hounded them towards extinction. Those events were what ultimately proved the Kurr a recessive species. The workers. The most numerous type of gender among the Kurr was the sterile working gender. In a colony of 100 Kurr, around 90 would be workers. Those workers varied in shape and size, as well as in what genetic memories they inherited. The variations depended on what task the worker was birthed for. Kurr had a short incubation time of only 3 months and were usually not born full size, but still ready to join the workforce and contribute to society from day one, relying on instructions from their elders until their brains were fully developed 6 years after birth. It was after those 6 years they became capable of utilizing their genetic memories. Overall, the adaptability of Kurr workers allowed colonies to utilize their surroundings with such efficiency that the Kurr altogether skipped the nomadic existence much sentient life goes through. However, this meant Kurr colonies had to choose between living far apart or competing for resources. For the naturally peaceful and cooperative Kurr, this always meant migrating rather than facing conflict or starvation. The genetic memory processing gender. The second most numerous gender of the Kurr were the genetic memory processing gender, processors for short, and the only type of Kurr to have all memories of a colony or a super colony within themselves. In a colony of 100 Kurr, an average of 7 were of this gender. The main purpose of this gender was to communicate with the workers of their daily experiences, trials, errors, successes, and failures. When sleeping, Kurr could process the information in their memories into genetic information to be passed on to the next generation. The process involved sorting out the useless information and compiling what remained into simple, understandable pieces of useful genetic memory to be passed on. Every piece would be very simple. A flash of vision depicting an object or a motion, the association of a scent or sound with danger. Simple as they were, the memories could have a sequence, and enough simple memories of actions in the right order would allow Kurr to eventually advance to the point of building and operating a form of quantum computer. Another task of the processors was to communicate the content of the memories near instantly and at great distance to the rest of the colony if needed, for example to warn of a predator not encountered in generations. The Hatchers. The least numerous gender of Kurr were those who hatched eggs. Out of a colony of 100, on average 3 belonged to the Hatchers. The Hatchers would communicate with the workers of the struggles they encountered and process this, while sleeping, into an understanding of what type of worker was needed. The Hatchers then had the ability to change the size of either a part of or the whole Kurr worker. If food was scarce, workers could be made smaller. If work was physically demanding, some limbs could be strengthened or exoskeletons hardened. The process was a simple one. By activating or deactivating a handful of genes regulating growth through dosing an egg with pheromones during various stages of incubation, the worker was altered. The effects were visually dramatic. The largest Kurr reached the size of rhino, while the smallest remained the size of dogs. Although still technically genetically identical clones, also the size of limbs and appendices varied. Hatchers could create new Kurr without a partner, but in order to pass down genetic memories of the colony, mating with the processors was necessary. And to gain new genetic strains to a colony, mating with Hatchers from other colonies was needed. The mating of 3 Kurrs was not possible, so the first generation of new Hatchers by 2 Hatchers were born a blank slate. Central government. The concept of authority of one individual over another did not come naturally to Kurr, as they had no social hierarchy. The formation of super colonies after arriving at the agricultural revolution created the need for centralized government, but the Kurr struggled to meet that need in earnest for many generations. Infrastructure needed to be planned, resources pooled, and future generations needed tending to by planning before they were born. But individual Kurr were wholly unsuited to the task of predicting the future through mathematics, reason, and abstract thinking. They relied on past failures and experience through genetic memory and on intuition. Through the process of trial and error, the Kurr would eventually form colony-wide patterns of communication mimicking decision-making bodies. Little as if every Kurr were a cell and every super colony a brain, or as if they discussed matters over an organic internet. Still, the limitations of individual Kurr affected the quality of this discussion. Although this new type of brain could make decisions, it never became capable of thinking abstractly for them. As such, they always had to build something first to see if it worked, learning from experience, never from imagination, and thus always needing to invest time and resources. The end. I hope you liked the video where we described the Kurr. We talked about their three genders, the workers, the processors, and the hatchers, as well as their struggles with forming central governance. We will cover the fatal flaws of the Kurr and explain why they were a recessive species in the Part 2 video next Tuesday. Please discuss any shortcomings you can predict by the characteristics I told you in the comments. See you next Tuesday.